And welcome back to the Give Me Liberty podcast. I'm joined by Dr. Stanley Ridgely, author of Brutal Minds, The Dark World of Left-Wing Brainwashing in Our Universities, a very important book that I'm glad to discuss today. Dr. Ridgely, welcome.
Thanks so much, Rod. It's a pleasure to be here. I love the opportunity.
Well, I tell you, at Liberty University, this is something top of mind, not only the quality of our education, but when we think about the country we live in, we have students that are being launched all around the world. We have students, though, that are going off into a brave new world, if you will, where they're being confronted with all kinds of challenges culturally, politically, where they find themselves in the business world, the professional working world. They're being confronted every which way with this kind of militant, if you will, progressivism that is being forced not only in academic institutions, but on Wall Street. I think it's an important work, something that you're talking about right now, sounding the alarm on education in many of our secular universities. I'll say this, many Christian, traditionally and historic Christian liberal arts institutions, private universities and colleges have been challenged by this wokeism, and it's finding its way into sort of the upper echelon of executive leadership in some of these institutions. This is absolutely something we have to be watching and very conversant about. So thank you for jumping on.
I appreciate that very much. So I think the book is an important book. It speaks to um, root causes of the issues that we have been dealing with, both in the public discourse with what's going on with CRT, what's going on with ESG and corporate world. And a lot of the source of a lot of what we see going on can be traced to the college campuses. Primarily, our abysmal education schools, the least respected units on the college campus, which feeds graduates into the college university bureaucracies, feeds these college graduates out into the real world, but also feeds these teachers back down into our primary, secondary, elementary schools, and fills up the spots of superintendents of school boards, superintendents of schools. And so we find that there's a feeder mechanism, which is why the ideology or the expression of it seems there's so much of sameness to it. Ronald Reagan has had a quote that I really like, and it really gets to the heart of things. He said, "Don't be afraid to see what you see." Right? And people are afraid to see what they see, and they deny what their eyes are telling them. They deny logic, reason. They deny even the scientific method at times. And they deny this because they've been told that, well, this is not right. You can't see this. You can't see the causation between X and Y. You have to believe something else. You have to believe Z is somehow affecting this. And you are the Z. You are the disaffected. You are the evil part of the equation. And you didn't even know you were part of the equation. So that cuts to Reagan was a great president, and that expression really says for me, don't be afraid to see what you see.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll just say this, and I want to get into this book and just kind of outline what we're talking about. But right now, in K through 12 education and in early childhood education, part of what's happening with, what you call it, CRT, or a social emotional learning, which is another euphemistic term that they've come up with because they're trying to hide CRT at this point. And it's often disassociative. What they're trying to teach young people, going back to the Reagan quote, don't be afraid to see what you see. Don't believe that what you're seeing is reality. And what they're being taught right now is that a square is a circle is a triangle is a square. And they're already teaching them sort of these disassociative patterns of thinking so that when they're faced with things like gender or things that are innate, if you will, from birth, they understand I am a girl, I am a boy, that they can somehow disassociate from that reality. And so that's what they're already doing at an early age. And it is part of this brutal mind, if you will, this brainwashing.
Yeah, there's this idea that we have a constant relativism here. Well, who can say what's this? Who can say what is that? Um, what is your source? Where are you getting this from? The idea that we have to question reality, the very fundamentals of reality that have guided humanistic civilization for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And they try to deny, I think, the fruits of the scientific revolution that went along with the Enlightenment, of course, which made possible the scientific revolution and our tremendous advancement in knowledge as exemplified in the university. I happen to believe that the classroom on the university, I believe in the Weberian, Max Weber, his notion of the classroom is a neutral ground, that he said, quite frankly, expressly, that the classroom is no place for political propagandizing. Certainly, the power relationship is suitable for that sort of thing for faculty who think they have some sort of hidden access to hidden knowledge. But the American university is an Enlightenment creation guided by the German model early in the last century, and it's basically, I view it as a repository of the best that had been thought and said, and it's guided by logic and reason and the scientific method and progress and the idea of improving the human condition in ways that we can, and then passing that patrimony on to the next generation. Now, the brutal minds on the college campus, my colleagues and the bureaucracy here, God bless them, they view the university a different way. Now, traditional liberals agree with what I just said, but radicals, leftists, and there's more and more of them now. The types of relativists, the type of postmodernists, the folks who are animated by critical theory, they look at the university in a really different way, and that is that the university is a crucible of indoctrination. It is not to discover any truths, all right? That maybe no, they already know the truth. They have access to this truth. It's called critical consciousness, and the only problem is how to bring the students along to this from their false consciousness to this critical consciousness. Now, you and I, Ryan, we have false consciousness, and it's a circular argument. It's a tautology in the sense that, well, what is critical consciousness? That means you have emerged from Plato's cave out into the bright sunshine of critical consciousness. Well, what's false consciousness? Well, you haven't yet emerged into critical consciousness. So it's a circular kind of argument. And they being the brutal minds on the campuses, are actively proselytizing this new version of the university. The motto of one of their off-campus groups is called the ACPA, which is a group of these bureaucrats. Their view and their motto is boldly transforming higher education. Now, these are not faculty that are saying this, but they are on the college campus. They are the bureaucrats who have been graduated out of schools of education, which is permeated, all of them are permeated with critical theory, quasi-Marxism, crypto-Maoism, without exception. They are graduating these people out of these advanced programs, such as student affairs and educational leadership, back into the university to assume positions in the bureaucracy created just for them. And then they exert their influence in what is called a co-curriculum. Most people haven't heard of the co-curriculum. I teach in the curriculum, as do my colleagues in chemistry and physics and history. There's a co-curriculum, and this is administered by student affairs and the bureaucracy. And the people who teach in this co-curriculum are not faculty, and they're animated by a singular ideology of crypto-Maoism, crypto-Marxism. And most of this is where you find your CRT. This is where you find either fake faculty, fake courses, fake curriculum, and they even offer fake transcripts. Rutgers University and St. John's University, they both, and many others, issue fake transcripts for what you've done outside the classroom. And so there is a definite, thing afoot on most all college campuses that is driving this.
So traditionally, by the way, those majors you just named, those would have been working in the food service industry, in baristas, working at Starbucks, but now they have ready-made jobs. Sorry, I'm just kidding. But they have ready-made jobs now working within the bureaucracy in this sort of circular system. If it wasn't for that, let's be honest, I mean, the market-based reality is there is no real practical use for, a gender studies professional. But anyway, I'm not trying to detract, but it's worth noting that it's a feeder system back into itself at some point, right?
This is not the way it's always been. This has only been active for the last 20 years or so. Education schools have been, hankering to exert influence on the college overall for many years, and they found the key. And I'm not the only one who's written on this. Lyle Asher at Lewis and Clark and Eric Gilbert have both written in the Chronicle of Higher Education on the issue, but not recently. The Chronicle has basically said that people like myself and those scholars that I just mentioned are not going to be published anymore, certainly not on these issues. Now, they being education schools, established these graduate programs in student affairs and in educational leadership, higher education management, graduated these folks out with these advanced degrees for jobs created just for them by their friends in the universities. And then they begin to exert their influence. Now, most people think, well, don't these people just got to make schedule games of ultimate frisbee or make sure the sound system works and the pizza's hot on karaoke night? Yeah, they do things like that. They do things like orientation, but they hanker to be faculty. They want to be faculty. Their writings, their readings, their books say that we are college educators. These are their words. We are college educators, just like faculty. And so they've created this imaginary as a parallel curriculum called the co-curriculum, in which they run these workshops. Now, they have the advantage of not having any oversight. Now, I teach in the business school, and there's a lot of oversight with regard to what you teach, how you teach it. And same way with many of my colleagues in the various disciplines and arts and sciences, et cetera, et cetera. Not all the oversight is what we'd like it to be, but by and large, we have it.
You have to fulfill the
exactly
components of accreditation and the degree program.
exactly.
And so all of that has already been planned out. You've got a provost, a dean, a chair, and full-time faculty adjunct, all of that. And you're right. So you have programming already, and for these guys, these are more like free agents that can sort of escape that kind of accountability.
You nailed it. I wish I'd said it that way. The fact is, I teach in academic affairs, which is what you just described. Over here, we have student affairs, and these guys are marching in lockstep ideology because they all came out of education schools, and I can address that ideology in a moment and where it comes from and why they do this. And once they're in this student affairs bureaucracy, over here we have the academic affairs you described, well, various motivations, political viewpoints, that kind of thing. Over here, we don't have that. What we have is a lockstep ideology learned in education schools that is being propagated 24/7 on the college campus. I mean, they say this. This is not my judgment. This is what they say. We want to establish milieu control over the college campus. And we were chatting earlier, Ryan, about the 8 conditions for establishing a thought reform program. And one of those, the initial one, is called milieu control. You control the entire milieu as much as you possibly can. And that means dorm life, dining halls, anywhere, student involvement in activities, seminars. You control the messaging as much as possible. And all of this I laid out in Brutal Minds. And that's the big difference between student affairs and academic affairs, and why. You will find this type of ideology on almost every college campus in America, because it's being pipelined in from an identifiable source.
Yeah, that is so good and so well put. I think for a lot of people, the question is it's not only realizing the problem in education, it's how do we respond? What is it that we can do? First is to raise a level of awareness to the point of alarm where people can understand, like, this is how bad the situation is. And then, yes, something needs to be done. So my question, I do want to get into something. You mentioned the sort of the 8 points here. Can you kind of walk us through those? I've got it pulled up, but milieu of control, mystical manipulation, demand for purity, cult of confession. Guys, I mean, that whoever's listening right now, I mean, that's going to itch your ear a little bit. Can you briefly just talk about a couple of those things, or touch on a few of those points, because this is basically like a new religion.
Yeah, it's a brainwashing program that was. I wish that I could have been the one who came up with the 8 points, but it's Robert J. Lifton, a psychiatrist who studied brainwashing as it came out of communist Chinese milieu and came out of North Korea in the 1950s. Famous study called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. And he identified 8 characteristics of a totalist thought reform brainwash session. And we can apply these 8 conditions. They all apply to the modern American university. There may be a program that's missing one of them, but the 8 characteristics are milieu control. The brainwashers want to have a controlling over the entire messaging milieu, not just the classroom, but res life, the dining halls, student activities, all have to carry that same message. Mystical manipulation is the idea. This is something that's so important as part of the brainwash. There's a mystic element to it, and it runs this way. I mentioned to you earlier, Brian, that you and I are suffering from false consciousness. Well, the critical crypto-Maoist ideology that these folks are imbued with gives them the impression that they have access to hidden knowledge, that they are anointed, right? That they've been admitted to the group of folks who know, who can peer into society and see the contradictions and the relations of power and privilege and their mission. And it's very messianic. It's very mystic. They believe themselves armed with the brief, the mandate to take this hidden knowledge and convert the rest of us out there in this crucible of indoctrination, which I mentioned in terms of how they view the university. Let me interject an old Marxist at Duke University when I was there. His name is Frederick Jameson. He said this explicitly: the purpose of college is to train the cadres of the future for our future Marxist struggles. Now, this is pretty explicit. This is how he viewed the university. He's still alive too, and he's still propagating the same message. There's a demand for purity. It's the third of the listing of conditions. And the demand for purity is you must express fealty to the ideology. There is no alternative. There's no exchange of ideas. There's no yeasty marketplace of ideas. No, you must adhere to this or you will be either censured or expelled from the movement, or you can be re-educated if you express the right kind of fealty. The cult of confession. That is kind of the core of it, in the sense that you are attacked for sins that you never committed, and you are tried to. In fact, there's an actual. I'll give you a name. Lisa Spanierman at the University of Arizona actually had advocated in her journal articles that we being of course these psychologists, we must engender a sense of guilt in our students, because it's easy to get people to feel guilty about anything if you show them the right type of material, even if they had nothing to do with it. They want to engender guilt because they have discovered that students are much more likely to take action in the realm of social justice if they feel guilty, even though there's no reason for them to feel guilt. And so that's the idea of confession. Confess your guilt. Confess that you've been part of the problem, that you're complicit in white supremacy or whatever the transgression du jour is. And once you've done that, then you can begin to do the work. They like to say this. They want to do the work of remedying the situation. And so we can move on to, of course, to sacred science, the idea that that this ideology that they're propounding is not subject to modification. We're not here to have discussion with you on this. There's loading the language, which anyone who's read 1984 understands the idea of loading the language to misidentify what is actually going on. Yeah. And the final two are, of course, doctrine over person, that it's the ideology that is at the apex of what we consider sacred, not the individual. And that if you decide you're going to deviate from that, then you will be punished accordingly. And of course, finally, the dispensing of existence. If you become a heretic, then, and this is where we get the term canceling from, you will be canceled because you're now a heretic. We'll demand an apology from you. Very much like Galileo, when he was a victim of the Inquisition, he had to apologize for his astronomical observations.
Right.
Yeah. And so now and if you don't, well, then you're canceled. And sometimes even if you do apologize, those are the 8 conditions that we find, and most of those exist on the college campus.
Let me go back into something, because this is really, really great observation, and I'm so glad you put this in your book. And I would encourage folks to please pick this up and read it, Brutal Minds. it is in many ways what we're seeing today is an inquisition, public inquisition of a new religion that is being foisted. And when I say new religion, I don't mean in the traditional sense of the words religion in terms of deity and theistic beliefs and all of that. I don't mean obviously in the traditional sense of Christianity, but rather tenets of a religion and an ideology and a worldview. And if you are outside of that, you will experience the wrath, you will experience the purification, if you will, where whatever those sacred heads, whatever the magisterial authorities might be, whether they be public health officials, whether they be critical conscience theorists in schools, student affairs, bureaucrats, whatever they might be, they're the ones who are going to delve out the wrath. There is an old saying, the law is teacher. In the Old Testament, in the Bible, the law instructs us. The law acts as our tutor that leads us to Christ. That's what Paul says. So in many ways, what young people are given is this sense of a totality of reality. It's completely incomplete. It is not the totality of reality, but a social justician is somebody that's going to say, this is what's wrong. Specifically, this is not only what's wrong externally, but this is what's wrong with you. And you can be the causal agent for change, but you first need to confess your sin of white supremacy or whatever it might be, racism, sexism, you name it, xenophobia against immigrants, whatever that might be. You have to confess that sin first, then you can be the agent of social change, and then you can be part of the revolution. And so this kind of utopian idealism, but it's all happening in education, and then it's spilling over into our institutions, the professional workplace, and obviously on Capitol Hill and any state legislature near you.
I'll tell you, you said a lot there, almost all of which, in fact, no, I'll say all of it, I agree with. Very profoundly stated. And you mentioned that the idea of this being a kind of a pseudo quasi-religion. Indeed it is, because the only place, and I'm going to get into brainwashing now, what I mean by that, rather than allowing it to hang out there and give people the impression it's the Manchurian candidate style of brainwashing. Brainwashing is used only by two entities to a great extent. Entities in the United States. One is American cults, the Unification Church, Synanon, People's Temple, and on college campuses, anywhere social justice education and transformative education is taught, is practiced. They're getting the brainwashed. This is indisputable. It's not not a point of contention. Now, what's really interesting here is that Richard Delgado, who is a lawyer, and his name is inextricably attached to critical race theory. But what people don't know, and probably he doesn't really want people to know, is that in an earlier incarnation in the 1970s, he was a lawyer who did a lot of research on cult recruitment in terms of free speech. How could free speech arguments with cult? And you'll find this in Brutal Minds, in his quotations, some of his citations from his work, that the Unification Church they were very sophisticated in this. They would bring a busload of potential recruits from the city out to the countryside where they're going to have a rally or a camp. And as people got off the bus, the Unification Church folks, who were very good at behavior modification, observing behavior, would separate the recruits' potential into two groups. One would be the sheep. Now, these were people who appeared to be, oh, look what we have here. Oh, this is wonderful. It's amazing. And the other group they called goats, streetwise people who were cocking an eye, like, what the heck's going on here? What is this all about? People look suspicious. The two streams of people, one would go, the sheep would go in to have the full-blown program. The goats would be given a short, perfunctory program. They'd be put on the bus and be back to town. And in this way, they disaggregated anyone who might be a dissenter, who might. So this is how actual religions utilize. I would say cult religion utilize these types of techniques, which are used indisputably on the college campus. I detail all of these types of techniques and how students can recognize them, how parents can recognize them, and how you can say no to it and emasculate these people who would do this kind of thing. When I say brainwashing, uh, I mean brainwashing in the sense of thought reform. Now, brainwash, yeah, it was created by a fellow by the name of Kurt Lewin, MIT sociologist, social psychologist in the 1940s. It was used to apply to criminals to help change their attitude, and it consisted in three parts: unfreezing a belief system, changing the belief system, and refreezing the belief system. Now, social justice educators cite Kurt Lewin as they are applying this. And I'll give you an example. If you, Ryan, want to be a brainwasher, you can go to Teaching Social Justice and Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. Go to chapter 4, and it will give you the Kurt Lewin project of how to attack a young student's sense of self, sense of identity, destabilize it, change the belief system to one that's more to their liking, and then refreeze it, give them activities to do the work. And this is why young people are so angry when they come home for that first Thanksgiving holiday, and they're angry that they don't believe their parent. They don't like their parents. Their parents are ignorant, that kind of thing. So the combination of that with the idea that they've been granted access to this hidden knowledge that is denied to their parents, old fashioned, that kind of thing, is very intoxicating for young people.